This has been very, very helpful for me, and I hope it's been helpful for you too. But one of the things that I have become increasingly aware of just in the past few days and over the weekend was the talk about what's going on internationally. And I'd like John to come and bring some perspective of that international piece, and is there any effect on that going on here in southwest Minnesota?
Thank you. Well, I started lecturing about our debt about 5 years ago, and my students called it the Angry Man speech. And so they kind of anticipated now. It has a reputation around campus. But I've expanded that, and I've lectured around the region. For instance, before the Iowa caucus, I was frequently talking in front of groups of people before presidential candidates, and it's kind of fun. I enjoyed it. But I'm the bearer of bad news, so if you want to kill the messenger, it's me. And even though this community is doing well, and partly because we have banks like Bremer Bank, and we're not dependent on what's going on in Wall Street as much as other communities are. But when we look at our 401ks and our mutual funds, we see that it affects us as well, particularly people who are close to retirement. And the news is not good. We can go all the way back to 1992 when Ross Perot was saying, this is not sustainable. What Ross Perot didn't know back in 92 is that the Chinese were going to kick in. What he was talking about is personal debt and national debt. We have record personal debt and we have record national debt. And if you follow the money trail, it's an international trail. And it goes back to China because that's where Walmart's buying the stuff that you're buying and you're putting on your credit cards. Now, in terms of personal debt, the average credit card is holding $12,000 of debt now. And that's high interest debt, as high as 30%. In terms of nationally, we don't elect politicians anymore who say, if you want it, you have to pay for it. They don't do that anymore. We're demanding services from our government, but if they say they're going to raise taxes, we don't elect them. This is nonpartisan. This is both Democrats and Republicans, okay? Your candidates are saying how they're going to give you money back. There's no money to give you. It's estimated that the Bush administration, by the end of the Bush administration, and if it was a Democrat, it'd be the same situation, is going to be $11.7 trillion in debt, which means the biggest share of your taxes is going to go to whoever they owe the money to. And you know who they owe the money to. It's Saudi Arabia because of the oil, it's the Kuwaitis, it's the Japanese, it's the Chinese, and it's to these countries. And they own trillions of dollars of our debt. So if you think your federal government is free to make these decisions without the influence of other countries, you're wrong. One estimate is that $700 billion bailout that we've been hearing about. One estimate is about half of that is going to go internationally, to the Saudis, to the Chinese. And eventually that becomes tax dollars, your children and maybe your grandchildren. So the bottom line in terms of your 401ks and your long-term investments in the stock market and things like that, sooner or later we have to flush out this debt because they're not going to keep lending to us. The Chinese government is already stopping some of the investments they were making in prior years because they all wind up losing money for the Chinese. Your government can no longer sustain itself on taxes. It depends on borrowing. This year we're going to borrow close to $500 billion instead of taxing you for that. But you should have been taxed for it. And I received my first credit card in 1969. I'm a baby boomer, and we're the debtor generation. We're a generation who learned that we can have stuff before we earned it. And that's the disease of our culture. That's what's going on now. And Ross Perot, God bless his soul, tried to warn us that we cannot have this attitude forever of having stuff before we've earned it. And sooner or later, the chickens have to come home to roost. Now, I didn't expect it this soon, and my own forecasts were a little further downstream, but they got wiser quicker than I thought. And if the Japanese and the Chinese, etc., stop lending money to us, there'll be a huge crash, and they've already started pulling back. And that's why we had the timing of this incident that we have now with Wall Street and the shenanigans that are going on with Wall Street. With Wall Street, what you had was debt that basically was hot. It's like hot potatoes. Pass it from one person to the next. They all take a share of the value out of that. And whoever winds up with it is the loser. Well, the losers were international. They wouldn't stand for it because our government is so deeply indebted to them. So locally, I agree with our speakers tonight. I feel that locally we're in a very strong situation compared to most of the country. I know in Iowa, I'm from Iowa originally, they're expecting a record crop of about $16 billion, which is $2 billion more than last year's record crop. It's boom times in the Midwest. Lucky you. But if you're holding paper, if you have a 401k, it may not be so pretty. And I don't see a quick fix. The debt is just too enormous. And the last thing I'm going to say is that your country has been invaded. It's not the illegal immigrants. It's international investors. It's the sovereign funds of governments. About 25% of your country is gone. They don't talk about it. They don't want you to know about it, but about 25% of the value of the United States is now held by foreign interests. Learn another language. Just to add to the bad news, because I'm the bearer of bad news here, I feel that our government and our leaders have not given you guys credit for the personal strength that you have. And I'm not talking about necessarily financial strength. I'm talking about moral strength, strength of character. In May, when the price of gas went up to $4, in 1 month, we decreased our travels by 10 billion miles. And now everybody's running around saying, isn't it great that the price of gas went down? Isn't it great that we've deferred a decision that we have to make as a nation to not be a debtor nation? As long as that price goes down, you're shoveling money to the Saudis and other countries to the tune of $600 to $700 billion of productivity leaving this country. And because we can't pay it back, we're giving them pieces of our country. I said earlier about 25% of this country is now foreign owned. That's not necessarily a bad thing as long as we own 25% of their country. You know what I mean? But I think we have the strength to become self-sufficient. We're not. And it's not being made clear to us, and I'm really disappointed in that. I'd say my lecture series down in Iowa was pretty much a failure. Ross Perot was a failure, but we have to come to grips with the fact that we have to be more self-sufficient as a nation. Less debt. Cut up your credit cards. Raise a garden in your backyard. You know, don't just go to a gym for exercise. Raise some vegetables in your backyard. Travel less, or if you do travel, go with other people or ride a bicycle sometimes. I don't do it in the snow, but I do it when the weather's nice, you know? And these are the kinds of things that we're going to have to do as a nation to come out of this hole. These guys are doing everything they can, and they're being very supportive, but it's up to you. It really is, to decide not to be a debtor nation. And we're the greatest debtor nation in history, and that means our future is in the hands of other people.
Steve, did you have any other comments?
No.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for coming. I appreciate Roger Madison from Bremer, Corey Skogren from Vanderhagen, Skogren and Associates, Steve Strauss from Wilson and O'Brien, John Goshner from SMSU, and Shirley Anderson-Porsche from University of Minnesota Extension. And I thank all of you for coming. Remember the website, marshallmoney.org has wonderful resources. Maybe you're purchasing a car or a used car. There's resources about where to check on things like that. Also, the good link for getting your credit report is available on that website rather than following the link based on late night television. So those kinds of things are wonderful tools and available for you. As I said at the beginning, I feel that if people have good information and factual information, you can make good decisions. And I thank you for your attention. And oh, one more question.
No.
I tell you what, why don't we go ahead and conclude this, and then if you have a question that you'd like to ask, come on up and we'll take it. Okay? Thank you.